Hi, welcome to my Mechagon Junkyard Guide. In this guide, I'll be breaking down all the abilities of all enemies you will face in a typical route in this dungeon. I'll be uploading the VODs seen in this video separately if you wish to see those. I'll also be uploading a routes video for Mechagon Junkyard in the future, so be sure to subscribe if you wish to see that. Just like with my previous guides, I'll be marking important or impactful mob abilities in red, and non-important or low damaging abilities in green. Junkyard is one of the more unique dungeons in Season 4 with regards to its routing. The dungeon features a patrolling final boss HK8 aerial suppression unit. At all points in the dungeon, it'll hover over one of the three non-final bosses of the dungeon. Fighting a boss while HK8 is flying over it will cause you to fight the boss on hard mode. Defeating any boss in this dungeon will also move this HK8 north to the next boss. For example, if he starts on Gobbamak, the northmost boss, upon defeating Naeno and Trixie, he'll move on to Gunker, the southmost boss. Every week, HK8 will start on a different boss. In Mythic Plus, you will never need or want to fight a hard mode boss. For this reason, you'll use a different route every week. Generally, a path of just going in and killing trash on the way to bosses will work fine. In most clips seen in this video, the robot starts on Naeno and Trixie, and we kill Gobbamak, Naeno and Trixie, and Gunker in that order. In addition to this, the dungeon also has a mini-bot mechanic, where one-time use robots are scattered throughout the dungeon. These robots are powerful, and grant your party a lot of potential damage. Upon death, you lose the buffs, so take good care not to die if you have the buffs on you. You can check the description or the prompt on your screen to watch a short video on their locations and what they do. They're important, so be sure to watch it. The dungeon can be divided into 4 parts, each corresponding to a boss and the trash that surrounds them. Let's start with the first boss, the part of the dungeon that leads to King Gobbamak. We'll call it the Troll Area. His area is primarily infested by trolls, with a small population of Soralisks and Scrapbots. Let's start by talking about the first pack in this area. The very first enemy you face is the Scrapbone Grunter. The Scrapbone Grunter is a simple mob in that it has no abilities, it only melees. However, it does not hold threat. This means that it cannot be tanked, and it cannot be taunted, and as a result, they run around madly, through their ability Rampaging. The idea here is to try to stick together so the enemies stay stacked up, allowing your group to AoE them down more quickly. The next mob is the Scrapbone Trash Tosser. Just like with the Grunter from before, they are untankable and as a result, jump around doing their own stuff. They spam cast Throw, dealing damage to a random party member. Occasionally, they also cast one of 2 other throws, alternating between the two. First is Throw Trash, where they throw an explosive and after a few seconds it lands, dealing damage in an AoE. The other is also Throw Trash, but this time they throw themselves. Yes, they consider themselves trash. Upon finishing the cast, they jump to another location, exploding a bomb at their previous position. You'll want to just step out of both these red circles. Finally, the most important mob is Scrapbone Shaman. They have 2 abilities. The first is Stone Skin, which grants a targeted enemy a 75% damage reduction and immunity to crowd control effects for 10 seconds. This is an important interrupt, as it prolongs the pull. It is a magic buff, so classes with a magic dispel should dispel it if you don't interrupt it. The other ability is far more dangerous, Grasping Hex. After a 2.5 second cast, they curse everyone in your party, rooting you in place for 8 seconds and dealing continuous damage over time. This is extremely deadly, potentially placing you in harm's way of other abilities such as Throw Bomb. By far the most important ability to interrupt, it is a curse. So should you fail to interrupt it, you can use decurses on yourself or your party. In other packs down the path, you may also face Scrapbone Grinders. They are dangerous primarily to the tank. Their first ability is Enrage, which after a 2-second cast, grants the Grinder a 100% fire damage increase for 10 seconds. You'll want to interrupt or soothe this so that the Grinder doesn't overwhelm your tank with his next ability, Skullcracker. After a 1-second cast that cannot be interrupted, the Grinder will slam your tank for good damage. It is physical damage, so by right, it should not be buffed by Enrage, but I cannot confirm. Next is the Soralisk Bone Ripper. Most Soralisks are found in a small pit to the right-hand side of the path, so the odds of pulling them are rather low. Should you happen to pull them, the Soralisk only really cast Ripping Slash on their current target, the tank, applying a bleed. Not much to look at here. Later on in the area, you may face your first Scrapbone Bully. The bullies cast the same enrage as the grinders, so you'll want to interrupt this. The bully has a different tank hit called Headbutt. This one knocks the tank backwards, so be careful not to get unintentionally knocked back into other packs' tanks. The bully's last and most important ability is Shockwave. The bully rounds an earthly shockwave in front of it, and after 2.5 seconds of casting, sends the shockwave forward. It's frequently an instant kill. If you don't die, it knocks you up. Sidestep this. And lastly, in this area, you may find scrap bots isolated from the other packs. These scrap bots are my least favorite mob due to how long they take to kill and the amount of damage they do. Their first and most important ability is Gyro Scrap. The scrap bot begins to spin wildly, dealing significant damage to all players within 6 yards. In addition to this, the scrap bot also shoots out multiple sparks which deal damage to all players caught in their AoE. When he does this, you must exit melee and dodge projectiles. He may take a while to kill if you have a lot of melee. The scrap bot also casts Exhaust, dropping a smoke cloud at the caster's location, obscuring all targets within the cloud from targets out of the cloud. The tank will want to pull the enemies out of the cloud to allow your ranged DPS to continue casting on said enemies. At some point in the scrap bot's lifetime, usually when it's low, though sometimes when it's up to 30%, it casts Self-Destruct, dealing lethal damage to all units caught within 8 yards of it. You'll just want to step out of this. Casting this will kill the scrap bot, so you can just move on to the next mob when it begins casting this. As a summary of the troll area, kick Grasping Hex, kick or Soothe Enrages, kick or Dispel Stone Skin, dodge Shockwaves, get out of melee for Gyro Scrap, and get out of Self-Destruction Protocol. After defeating some of the trash that surround the boss, you finally face the boss himself. King Gobbamak starts the fight by summoning a whole bunch of scrap-bone grunters. These grunters are very much like the grunters faced earlier. They attack random players. Generally, you won't have to DPS them down manually because of the boss's next ability. King Gobbamak casts Charged Smash, a 3-second cast where the boss slams their current target, dealing good damage to that target. Gobbamak also does an additional component of damage, which is split evenly among all players caught in the radius. Upon hitting, the boss will knock you back and apply Electrical Charge to you. Electrical Charge lasts for 20 seconds, dealing damage every 2 seconds for its duration. You can use this charge to power up one of the 5 nearby objects. Doing this removes Electric Charge off you and activates that object. There are 4 pylons. Turning them on will zap the grunters, instantly killing a few of them. There's 1 robot that walks over to grunters and slashes them to death. These objects remain activated long enough for the boss to cast their next Charged Smash. This generally means grunters won't be an active part of the fight, so long as you activate the pylons and robots on every cast of Charged Smash. Other than that, the boss also frequently casts Rumble, bouncing up and down and dealing damage to all players every second for 5 seconds, and causing cave-ins around the room. Each cave-in creates a circle on the ground that stuns you if you stand in them when the rocks land. Don't stand in these circles and brace for the incoming unavoidable damage. Once you've defeated Gobbamak, we continue to the next part of the dungeon. We'll call this part the Mechagon Area. Most mobs in this area primarily inhabit a small enclosure along with the boss. Some mobs from this area patrol and stand around right outside. Let's talk about them first. Starting the dungeon, if you follow the path left to head to the Mechagon Area, you'll face a pack of 3. The first mob here is the Piston Head Scrapper. Note that there are 2 in the first pack, but one of them is an Atrazine. At the start of the dungeon, all Scrappers cast an ability called Scrapper. This causes their attacks to have a chance to do additional fire damage. They also cast Sledgehammer, inflicting great damage to your tank, and reducing your tank's armor by 10% for 6 seconds. This stacks, and it may be because of this that it may be unwise to pull a significant number of Scrappers in the same pull. This pack also has the Piston Head Blaster. The Blaster primarily casts Shoot, shooting a random party member. Blasters, just like Grunters earlier, are untankable, so beware. They also cast Run and Gun, moving to a new position and shooting 3 bullets at random players, potentially the same player 3 times. Scrap Grenade is where the Blasters throw a grenade at a player. Just step out of this red circle. Beyond this pack of 3 also lies one patrolling mob I also dislike, the Weaponized Crawler. Their first ability is Scrap Cannon. They target a random player, possibly the tank, and shoot a piercing projectile in that direction. You cannot dodge this, as it tracks the player until the cast goes off. Stand still and have your allies move aside when you are targeted by this. You'll want to minimize damage intake because of the crawler's next ability, Shock Coil. For the next 6 seconds, the crawler will deal significant damage to the entire party. If your healer struggles to keep up, you should use a defensive here. More often than not, the crawler will be able to cast this at least twice in its lifetime, so beware. Other packs outside of the enclosure also have at least one Scrap Hound. Scrap Hound has 2 abilities. The first is Metallic Jaws, which deals good damage to your tank after a 1-second cast. Their other ability is Bork, where they turn towards a random player and begin casting. After 2 seconds of casting, they shoot out a sonic wave which deals some damage, slows you, and reduces your haste by 50% for 10 seconds. And finally, outside the enclosure, precisely one pack has one copy of the Piston Head mechanic. The mechanic is dangerous. Their first ability is Shield Bash. They use this ability most frequently and it does damage and interrupts your tank. Their second ability, very important, is Overclock, increasing the haste of all robotic units within 15 yards by 100% for 10 seconds. Mechagnomes are robots. This effectively buffs all enemies. You need to interrupt this. If you miss it, you want to dispel as many as you can, maybe through something like Mass Dispel. Their other important ability is Repair. It heals a robot ally for 50% of their health. You want to interrupt this. And so you finally make your way into the enclosure. The enclosure itself has 2 main entrances, both guarded by 2 heavy scrap bots. Should you choose to fight these, I'll run through them briefly. They share a few similarities with the malfunctioning scrap bot from the other Troll Zone. They cast Gyro Scrap, so stand out of melee and dodge circles. They also cast Exhaust, so tank needs to pull them out. But instead of self-destructing, they cast Repair Protocol, healing themselves for 90% of their health after a cast. You have to interrupt this. Instead of pulling scrap bots at either entrances, you can actually go through this little hole in the wall. But entering through here can be perilous due to the proximity to the 3-pack. This pack is located right on where the patrol goes through. And that patrol is deadly. It has the Affix miniboss. So you'll either have to pull the pack of 3 out, or combine the pulls, both of which can be dangerous. All packs in the enclosure are a combination of all mobs spoken of earlier. Some are harder than others, and the tank should plan the pulls well to avoid being overwhelmed. Note that the crawler on the hill does not need to be pulled, so avoid pulling it if you can. As a recap, don't pull too many scrappers, dodge scrap cannon, dodge Bork, interrupt Overclock, interrupt Repair, get out of Gyro Scrap, and interrupt Repair Protocol. Now the boss fight. This is a 2-man fight, Naeno Mega Crash and Trixie Taser. The fight also involves a Mechacycle, a vehicle that Naeno frequently enters. The fight starts with Trixie casting Jumpstart, juicing up the Mechacycle and allowing Naeno to cast his ability Roll Out. Once Naeno is on the cycle, he rolls forward on it using Pedal to the Metal, where he rushes forward in the direction he is facing after 5 seconds, dealing lethal damage to all enemies in his path. After finishing this rush forward, Naeno spins around on the spot, dealing damage to anyone nearby, and creates a cloud of obscuring smoke. Keep track of the position of this smoke. He'll then cast Pedal to the Metal once again, and after that, the bike will be used up, and Naeno will jump out and beat you up with his fists. He will remain on the ground until Trixie casts Jumpstart again. While Naeno's doing tricks on his cycle, Trixie will be busy spamming Tase at the party. Should she successfully cast Tase, she hits a random player, applying a dot which deals good damage over 20 seconds. This debuff stacks. You'll want to cycle interrupts to make sure she casts this as few times as possible. Once in a while, Trixie will cast Electric Slide and move around the arena. Follow her. Her big ability is Mega Zap. Check who she's targeting, and that person will have to walk into the smoke cloud to avoid getting hit by Mega Zap, which applies a beefed up version of Zap. When on the ground, Naeno casts 2 abilities. Bolt Buster is a tank frontal. Don't be behind the tank. Once in a while, he'll also charge to an area after a 2-second cast. It's telegraphed quite aggressively, so just avoid the circles. And finally, you'll want to kill both bosses at generally the same time, as they each enrage when the other is dead. If you kill Naeno first, Trixie gains a buff that increases her haste by 100%. This means more zaps, and eventually overwhelming damage. Killing Trixie first will grant Naeno a buff, which causes his successful melee attacks to deal additional nature damage to the entire party. You can afford some difference in health, but not too much. Naeno has about half Trixie's health, so generally this won't be a problem. Stay on Trixie for most of the fight, and cleave on Naeno when he's out of his sight. After defeating that boss, you'll find yourself moving towards the third boss, Gunker. However, I personally enjoy cutting through the final boss zone to get to Gunker, so let's talk about the final boss's area first. The final boss area is contained to the left region of the map. Should you decide to cut through here to pass to the slime zone, you'll meet your first enemy, the Mechagon Prowler. The Prowler is a simple mob. They always start invisible, so abilities such as Flare and Spectral Sight can be handy to see them early. They deal a fair amount of damage through melee on the tank, and only really have one ability, Pounce, where they jump on a random party member and apply a bleed. They only cast this on players farther than a few yards, so stay within melee range and you won't be jumped on. Past the Prowlers, you'll meet a group of 3 that patrol the area. This pack consists of 3 mobs. The first is the Mechagon Trooper. The Trooper is not too dangerous, primarily casting Nano Slicer that applies a bleed to your tank, and casts Techno Jaunt to teleport to your tank's location. The other mob is the Mechagon Renormalizer, the mob you'll have to pay attention to the most in this part of the dungeon. They have 2 abilities, Enlarge and Shrink. Enlarge is where they target a random enemy, and grants that enemy 100% more damage and health. Shrink targets a player, and shrinks them, reducing their size, damage, and healing done by 99%. If any other player moves over them while they're shrunk, they will die. Both these abilities can be interrupted, and they both can be dispelled as well. Healers dispel Shrink from teammates, and everyone else with magic dispels dispel Enlarge, though generally prevention is better than cure. The last mob in this patrol is the Mechagon Cavalry. They have 2 abilities. First is where they cast Charge at a random party member, dashing towards that member and dealing damage to all players within 8 yards. Just step out of the circle. Their other ability is Rapid Fire, where they shoot a barrage of bullets in the direction they're facing. Then they begin to rotate counterclockwise, all while still pumping out bullets. You'll want to dodge this, it is a lot of damage. After defeating this pack, you follow the path and arrive at the entrance to Gunker's territory. The gate is guarded by 2 troopers and a Renormalizer. As a recap, the troopers bleed your tank and the Renormalizer shrinks and enlarges. I like to pull this pack of 3 with a pack just up the hill, containing 2 anodized Coil Bearers. The Coil Bearer's main ability is Charged Coil, where they deal some damage to all players 4 times over 6 seconds. You'll want to interrupt this to reduce incoming group damage. Their other ability is Defensive Countermeasure, granting them a shield you'll want to dispel. Defeating them, you officially enter the slime area. There are only 4 unique mobs. With the tank determining the pace of the pull, you'll have to hope that your tank doesn't pull more than your group can handle. The first mob is the Toxic Monstrosity. You'll need to defeat 3 of these to activate the boss. The Toxic Monstrosity only really has one ability. It's called Consume. It immediately grips all players into melee range of itself. It will then slowly start to draw that player in, while spreading a consuming slime. Touching this consuming slime will apply a disease debuff that deals a significant amount of damage. You'll want to immediately run away from this mob the second it begins casting this ability. Standing farther from it causes you to take longer to get pulled in by the tendrils, potentially causing you to receive the debuff before you've even had a chance to run away. Beware of this. The next mob is the Slime Elemental. Their main ability is Slime Bolt, where after a short cast, they deal damage and slow a target for 8 seconds. You can use Interrupt here if you would like, but there is another interrupt later on that may be more important. Their other ability is Slime Wave, where after a 2-second cast, they charge forward, knocking back and dealing significant damage to players in their path. This is often lethal, so beware of this. After Slime Elementals is the Gnome Eating Slime. Gnome Eating Slimes frequently cast Acid Splash, dealing minor damage to all players. However, when they lose health, they shed into smaller Gnome Eating Droplets. These droplets also cast Acid Splash frequently, and they multiply quite rapidly. Too many of these can be a hazard, so burn these down quickly, and a few AoE stuns here or there could be useful. Finally, the Toxic Lurker. The Toxic Lurker only really has one ability, Toxic Smog. After a 2-second cast, they channel for 10 seconds, stunning a targeted player for that duration. You must interrupt this or a player may potentially die to mechanics from other mobs. After defeating 3 monstrosities, you finally face the third boss, Gunker. Gunker is a very simple boss. The fight starts with 3 bots that you freed from killing the monstrosities, running around in circles around the boss, each at a differing distance from the boss. When he does this, one of 3 robots will be gooped. You must destroy the goop to free the robot. The robots moving in circle actually clean up the goop thrown all around the room. You will be taking advantage of this, and you'll need them up for the full fight. The goop landing itself does no damage. However, standing in goop will apply a disease debuff to you. Should it stack up to 3, you'll be encased in goop, not unlike the one that the boss uses on the robots. Standing in the robots for the whole fight will basically render you immune to this, as the goop cannot exist inside the robot's AoE. Beside that, Gunker also casts Coalesce, drawing in all players and toxic goops. Make sure you're not hit or get sucked in. You can stand in front of the robots to avoid the goop, as the goop will get pulled right into your robot, destroying it. He also casts Toxic Wave, unleashing a barrage of toxic goop outwards. This time you can stand behind your robots, as the robots intercept your goop. And that's the whole fight. Both the boss and the trash are by far simplest in this dungeon, so if you want easy trash, pull it here. On to the last boss. Up the hill, there is a pack that you must beat to get to the last boss. It has True Sight. As a recap, you look out for Coil Bearer's Charged Coil, Renormalizer's Enlarge and Shrink, Cavalry's Charge, and Rapid Fire. The fight begins with you attacking a Tank Buster. The Tank Buster's primary ability is Wreck, where they strike your tank 3 times with increasing intensity. Tanks, you will need active mitigation for this. The Tank Buster's other ability is Fulminating Zap. Around every 9 seconds, he casts this on a random player. It does fair damage, so the healer will have to keep that player topped up. When fighting the Tank Buster, the aerial unit in the sky casts a few abilities. First is Cannon Blast. It leaves a path of bombs in a straight line. Avoid this. The aerial unit also occasionally summons a set of 3 adds through Reinforcement Relay. These bots are immune to damage and deal damage to players within 5 yards of them through Static Discharge. This also leaves a trail behind them, dealing damage to players. You'll want to crowd control these mobs with abilities such as Ring of Peace or Shining Force. After some time they will destroy themselves, so you don't need to worry about them for long. After defeating the Tank Buster, the arena opens up and one of 2 pylons will activate. You'll have to make your way up a perilous path to a pylon and interact with it to bring the aerial unit down temporarily. Getting hit by a robot sends you to the start and deals some damage to you. Avoid these robots. You can jump over the lasers comfortably, so just keep calm and make your way up to the pylon. The pylon starts at 100 energy, and every second you interact with it, it drains 2 energy. Once you've depleted its energy, the boss will fall and be haywired, making them take 200% increased damage. Should you fail to kill the boss in that 30-second window of haywire, the boss will begin to cast Blast Off. Upon successful cast, he will leave the area and summon another Tank Buster, and you repeat this process again. Note that failing to depower the pylons before 3 minutes causes the boss to finish their cast of Annihilation Ray, wiping out your entire party. You generally want to one-phase this boss to reduce the time taken for this fight. And that's the whole dungeon. It's quite a long dungeon, and one that can be complicated. However, it is relatively generous in its timer, and most mobs aren't too mechanically complex. I know it can be intimidating playing Mythic Plus, especially if you aren't caught up on all the dungeon mechanics. I hope this video taught you something new about Mechagon Junkyard. I plan on making a guide for all other Season 4 dungeons too, so be sure to subscribe if you want to catch those. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next dungeon guide.